I was standing on my parents' front porch with a lemon cake in my hands when I heard my mother say my name. I had my keys looped on one finger and my knuckles half raised to knock. The screen door was open behind the storm door, and her voice carried clean through the mesh. She was telling my brother not to worry about the debt. "We'll have your sister cover it," she said. "She never refuses family." I never did get to ring that bell. What I did in the 7 days after that afternoon, and what my mother's face did when she finally knocked on my door, is the part I still turn over in my head at night. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Kendra, I'm 34. This is the week my family found out that the daughter who never said no finally learned how. If you have ever been the one everyone quietly leans on, this one is going to land close to home. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I should have just knocked. That is the thing I keep coming back to. If I had knocked, I would have walked into a different version of my life, the one where I didn't know. Instead, I stood there with the cake getting warm against my palms, and I listened. Travis was talking first, low and miserable, the way he gets when the money runs out. He said the collectors were calling his cell now. He said Brooke was scared. He said he didn't know how he was going to make it through the month. And my mother, Sharon, made that soft clucking sound she makes. The one that always meant everything was going to be fine because she had decided it would be. "Don't stress about the debt, baby," she said. "We'll have your sister cover it." There was a pause. A chair creaked. Then she said the line I have not been able to unhear since. "She never refuses family." I waited for someone to disagree. I waited for my father to say something. Anything. Like maybe that's not fair. Or maybe we should ask her first. He didn't. I heard the small grunt that passes for my father agreeing with my mother, and that was all. They weren't going to ask me. That was the part that turned my stomach to ice. This wasn't a request that hadn't been made yet. This was a decision that had already been made, in a kitchen I grew up in, about money I had earned, without a single one of them thinking they needed my voice in the room. I set the lemon cake down on the top step, very carefully, like it might go off. I walked back to my car. I did not slam the door. I drove the 12 minutes home with both hands on the wheel and my mind doing the only thing it knows how to do when it's afraid. It started counting. Here is the thing you need to know about me. I count. I have counted for as long as I can remember. I am a bookkeeper. I keep the ledgers for 3 small businesses in town, a hardware store, a dental office, and a landscaping outfit, and I am very good at it. People think numbers are cold. I think numbers are the most honest thing in the world. Numbers don't have a tone. Numbers don't sigh at you across a kitchen table. Numbers just sit there and tell you the truth, and the truth is usually that someone took more than they put back. I learned to keep books before I learned to drive. I was 16 when the plant let my father go in 2009, and the bills started coming in faster than anyone in that house wanted to look at them. My mother couldn't face the envelopes. My father just stopped opening the mail, so I started a notebook. I wrote down what came in and what went out. I called the electric company and set up a payment plan in a voice I made sound older than I was. Somewhere in there, without anyone ever saying it out loud, I became the one who handled things. The fixer. The responsible one. The daughter you could hand a problem to and trust it would get solved quietly, without drama, without a fuss. It became who I was. And the trouble with becoming the person who never says no is that everyone around you stops being able to imagine you saying it. They stop hearing it as a possibility. By the time I was driving home from that porch, I already knew, in the cold mathematical part of me, exactly how much money my husband and I had saved. I knew it to the dollar. And I knew they were going to come for it. We had $61,000. I am telling you the number because the number matters. It was not family money. It was not a windfall or an inheritance or anything that fell out of the sky. It was 11 years of 2 people who packed their own lunches. Daniel runs wire for a living. He's an electrician. And I keep books. And between us, we are not rich, and we never pretended to be. We saved that money the boring way, a little at a time. In a savings account I balanced every single month. And most of it was not even really ours anymore, not in the way that mattered to my heart. Most of it was earmarked. Daniel and I had been trying to have a baby for 4 years. We had been through 2 rounds of IVF that didn't take, and the grief of that is a whole story I am not going to put you through tonight. What you need to know is that the bulk of that $61,000 was the 3rd round. It was the appointment we hadn't scheduled yet because I kept flinching at the cost. It was the maybe baby we were still saving toward, dollar by careful dollar. So when I stood on that porch and heard my mother promise my brother's debt away, using my account like it was a community, well, she wasn't reaching for my savings. She was reaching for the child we hadn't had yet. I don't think she knew that. I want to be fair, even now. I don't think Sharon sat there doing the math on what that money was for, but that is almost worse, isn't it? She didn't even need to know what she was taking. She just assumed it was hers to take. Daniel was home before me, boots off, reading something on his phone at the kitchen table. He looked up when I came in without the cake and saw my face. He's not a dramatic man. In 8 years of marriage, I have seen him raise his voice maybe twice, and both times it was at a referee. He just put the phone down and said, "Tell me." So I told him. I told him about the porch and the screen door and the chair creaking and the line. "We'll have your sister cover it. She never refuses family." He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is a thing I love about him, and when I finished he was quiet for a second. He didn't get angry the way I expected. He didn't say we should march over there. He just looked at me with that steady look he gets when he's solving a problem, the same look he has when he's tracing a short in somebody's old wiring. "Okay," he said. "So here's what we do." He laid it out plain. He said the savings account was the exposure. He said as long as the money was sitting where it had always sat, where my family knew it sat, it might as well have a sign on it. He said open a new account, in my name only, at a bank none of them banked at, and start moving it. Tonight. Not next week. Not after I'd had a chance to talk to my mother and feel better. Tonight. "Move every penny," he said. "Tonight." He wasn't taking it over. That's the part I need you to understand. He didn't grab my laptop or make the calls for me. He handed me the idea, and then he got up and made me a cup of tea, while I sat there and stared at the number I knew by heart, and I started to think like myself again. The first call came the very next morning. My mother is not a patient woman when she has decided something. I was at my desk with my second coffee when her name lit up my phone, and I knew before I answered that this was the opening move. She was sweet. That's how I knew. Sharon is sweetest right before she asks for something. She started with "How was I? How was Daniel? Wasn't the weather turning?" And then she drifted, the way she does, toward the real subject like a current pulling at a boat. "Your brother's going through a rough patch," she said. "You know how Travis is. He just needs the family to close ranks." I held the phone and I said the things you say. That's hard. I'm sorry to hear it. I did not say what I knew. I have learned that the most powerful thing you can do with a person who is fishing is to simply not be a fish. She probed. She asked, light as anything, whether Daniel and I were doing okay, money-wise, with everything. She mentioned twice that we'd always been the steady ones. And then she said something that snagged in me like a hook. "I was thinking," she said, "about that account you and I still have together, from your grandmother's care. We should sit down about that, you and me." I said something about needing to get back to work. I hung up and I sat very still. I had forgotten about that account. I had genuinely forgotten it existed. And the fact that my mother had not forgotten, the fact that she had reached for it first thing, told me she had been thinking about it for a while. She had a map of my money in her head, and there was a door on that map I had left unlocked years ago. Travis showed up 2 days later. He didn't call first, which is very Travis. He just rolled into my driveway in the truck he still owed money on and ambled up to my door with his hands in his pockets like he was doing me a favor by visiting. My brother is 31 and he has the gift, which I have never had, of believing that his bad luck is something the universe owes him a refund on. He sat at my kitchen table and drank my coffee, and told me a long, winding story about the bar. The bar was his big idea 3 years ago, the one our parents co-signed a chunk of. It failed the way bars fail, slowly and then all at once, and instead of cutting his losses, he'd tried to win it back. And I caught the word online and the word blackjack before he caught himself and changed it to investments. 30,000 from the bar, 18 more from the thing he wouldn't name, $48,000 of whole. "You've got it good, Ken," he said, looking around my kitchen like it was a showroom. "You and Daniel. Steady jobs, no kids draining you, money just sitting there." He said it like an accusation, like my stability was a thing I'd stolen from him. My phone buzzed on the counter while he was still talking. It was Brooke, his wife, and the text was already loaded and waiting, like she'd been timing it. "Family helps family," it said. "Hope you're not too busy with your IVF stuff to remember that." I read it twice. The cruelty of it was so casual she probably didn't even feel it leave her hand. I put the phone face down. I refilled my brother's coffee, and I said nothing, because I had finally figured out what I was going to do, and it was not going to happen at my kitchen table. After Travis left, I stood in my kitchen and I made a decision. I was not going to fight them. I want to be honest about why, because it isn't what you might think. It wasn't that I was afraid of them. It wasn't that I couldn't stand up for myself. It was that I knew, from a lifetime of watching, exactly how a fight with my mother goes. You raise your voice, she raises hers, she cries, somebody storms out, and a week later nothing has changed except now you're the bad guy who made your mother cry. A fight was a game they knew how to win. Numbers were a game I knew how to win. So I made myself a different kind of promise. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to do what I do for a living. I was going to take every loose, emotional, manipulative claim they were going to throw at me and turn it into something with a date and a dollar sign next to it. I was going to move the money where it belonged. I was going to find out exactly where I was exposed and close every door I had the right to close. And I was going to build a record, a clean, quiet, undeniable record of every single thing this family had ever taken and never given back. I'm an accountant. I don't argue. I reconcile. And once you've decided to reconcile a thing, the question stops being, how do I feel about this? The question becomes a simpler one, the only question that has ever made sense to me. Where did the money actually go? And who actually owes who? I poured out the last of the coffee. I opened my laptop. And I started, the way I start everything, with a clean page and a column for the truth. The next morning, I drove to a credit union on the other side of town, one nobody in my family had ever set foot in, and I opened an account in my name only. It took 40 minutes and my driver's license and a smile at a young teller named Haley, who had no idea she was helping me dismantle 30 years of being the family bank. I want to tell you it felt dramatic. It didn't. It felt like filing. It felt like the dozens of small, boring, correct things I do every day that nobody ever notices. The kind of quiet competence that holds a person's whole life together while everyone assumes it runs on its own. I went home and I sat down at the laptop and I began to move the money the way you'd move something fragile across a room. A little, then confirm it landed, then a little more. I did it in daylight, with the records open, every transfer dated and labeled, because if there is one thing my job has taught me, it is that the person with the cleanest paper trail wins every argument before it starts. While I worked, I heard my mother's voice in my head. She never refuses family. She'd said it like a fact about the weather, like gravity. And the strange thing was, she wasn't wrong. I never had refused them. Not the time Travis needed first and last on an apartment. Not the time my father's truck threw a transmission. Not the Christmas the heating bill came due, and nobody else had it. I'd covered all of it, quietly, year after year, and I'd told myself it was love. Sitting there moving my own money out of my own family's reach, I started to wonder, for the first time, whether it had ever once been love going the other direction, or whether love had just been the word they used for the bill they handed me. The savings were safe by Thursday. I should have felt finished. I didn't, because somewhere in the back of my mind a number kept tapping on the glass, and on Thursday night I finally remembered what it was. The joint account. Years ago, when my grandmother got sick, somebody had to manage her care money, and that somebody was me, because of course it was. To make it simple, my mother and I had opened a joint checking account together back in 2016 to pay Grandma's bills out of. Grandma passed in 2019. The account never got closed. It just sat there, the two of us still on it. Mostly empty, a leftover I'd stopped thinking about. And a joint account, I knew, was a very different animal from my savings. I called the bank Friday morning and asked to close it. The woman on the line was kind and very clear. A joint account, she explained, belongs equally to both owners. Either one of us could put money in or take money out, without the others say so. But closing it, fully closing it, generally needed both account holders to agree, or a specific process. I could pull my own contributions out. I could remove myself from future deposits. But I could not, sitting alone at my desk on a Friday, simply make that account disappear with my mother still on it. I hung up and I sat with that. It was the one door I couldn't slam by myself. And it landed on me, slow and cold, just how smart Daniel's advice had been. If I had left my savings where they'd always been, if I'd waited even another week, my mother could have walked into a branch and moved money out of accounts she had access to and called it a family matter. She had a key to one room of my financial house. I'd just spent the week emptying every other room she didn't. That weekend I started pulling the history. Not the recent stuff, the call from Sharon, the text from Brooke. I screenshotted those and filed them, sure. But that was the easy part. What I really wanted was the long record, the one nobody in my family thought existed because nobody but me had ever kept it. I logged into my old bank's website and I went back. Years back. I started writing down every transfer that had ever left my hands and gone to them. It is a strange thing to sit in your own kitchen on a Saturday and watch your generosity scroll past in a list. $600 here for a car payment, $1,200 there when the bar's lease came due, $400 at a Christmas, $2,000 for a deposit. Each one at the time had felt like nothing. Each one had felt like the obvious thing, the loving thing, the thing any good daughter would do. Laid out in a column, they stopped looking like love. They started looking like a pattern, a subscription nobody had asked me to sign up for, that auto-renewed every time someone in that house ran short. And I noticed something else as I went. Not one of those transfers had ever come back. Not a dollar. Not once had a deposit landed in my account marked, "Thanks, Ken, here's that $200. It had only ever flowed one direction, out, the way water only ever runs downhill, and they had all stood at the bottom of the hill for years with their hands cupped and called it family. I remembered there was more. Older paper from before everything was digital. Checks, notes, a thing I had a memory of Travis signing once and laughing about. I knew exactly where it would be. I went to find the box. Before I could get to the attic, my mother called again, and this time the sweetness had a little iron under it. She'd given me a few days to come around, and in her mind that was generous. She started, as always, with concern. Had I been sleeping? Did I sound tired? And then, gently, like she was reminding me of a dentist appointment, she circled to the account. I was thinking, she said, we should just keep that joint account open. It's handy. For family things. You never know when something's going to come up. For family things. I almost laughed. She was telling me, in her own velvet way, that she'd noticed it too. That little unlocked door, and she wanted me to leave it propped open. She wanted a standing account she could reach into and call it ours. Then she did the thing she always does when sweetness isn't moving me fast enough. She reached for the dead. Your grandmother, she said, her voice going thick. She'd be so sad to see this family pulling apart over money, after everything I did, caring for her, after everything we sacrificed. I sat very still. My grandmother had been mine too. I was the one who'd driven her to chemo. I was the one who'd kept the account, paid the bills, sat with her on the bad nights. And here was my mother, using her like a chess piece, in a conversation that was really about $48,000 she wanted me to hand to my brother. "I have to go, Mom," I said. "I love you." And I did. That was the awful part. I hung up and I felt the guilt come up the way it always had, hot and automatic, trained into me since I was 16. But this time, underneath it, something harder had finally set. That night, I finished the job. I moved the last of my own money out of every account my mother could see or touch into the credit union she'd never heard of, every transfer time-stamped, every balance reconciled to the penny. When I was done, the old savings account that had held our whole future sat nearly empty, and the joint account held exactly what it had always truly held, which was a little over $3,000, and almost all of that was money my mother had actually put in herself over the years. I left it there. I want you to notice that, because it matters to me. I did not take a dime that wasn't mine. I'm not built that way, and besides, taking her money would have made me a character in her story, the ungrateful daughter who stole. Instead, I left her exactly what was hers, $3,200 and change, sitting right where she'd left it. "Move every penny," Daniel had said. So I had. Every penny that was mine. And as I closed the laptop, I realized the most important thing of all. She didn't know. My mother was still walking around inside a version of the world where my money was where it had always been, where the well was full, where her plan was a sure thing waiting on a date. She had built her whole approach, the sweetness, the grandmother, the joint account she wanted to keep handy, all of it on an assumption that had quietly stopped being true sometime around Tuesday. I sat in the dark of my kitchen for a minute just feeling it. The strange level calm of knowing something the other person doesn't. It isn't triumph. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling a bookkeeper gets when the columns finally balance, and you know the answer before anyone else has even found the page. The next afternoon, I went up to the attic and I found the box. It was an old shoebox, the cardboard gone soft at the corners, with the word MISC in my own teenage handwriting on the lid. I'd packed it years ago without really meaning to keep it, the way you keep things. And I sat down on the dusty attic floor and took the lid off. And there it all was. The paper history of being the family's safety net. There were check stubs, the carbon kind, from before I did everything online. There was an envelope of receipts. There were printouts I'd made of old transfers, back when I still printed things, because even at 23 some part of me had wanted a record. And near the bottom, folded in quarters, there was a single sheet of lined notebook paper that stopped my breath. It was a promissory note. Travis had written it in 2017, when I'd given him $4,500 to keep the bar's lights on for one more month. I'd half-joked that he should put it in writing, and he'd laughed and grabbed a pen and scrawled it out at this very kitchen table. I, Travis Mercer, owe my sister Kendra $4,500 to be paid back when the bar turns a profit. And his signature underneath, big and loose and sure of itself. The bar never turned a profit. The $4,500 never came back. I had forgotten the paper even existed. He certainly had. I sat there on the attic floor holding it, this thing he'd signed as a joke, this thing that had been gathering dust over my head for years while the whole family agreed, without ever saying so, that I was a resource, and not a person who could be owed. It was all there, in my own handwriting and in his. Years of help that everyone had agreed to forget. I had not forgotten. I had only filed it. I brought the box downstairs and I did what I am good at. I built a ledger. Not an angry list, a clean one, the kind I'd hand a client, the kind that doesn't need you to raise your voice because the numbers do all the talking. I made my columns: date, amount, purpose, repaid. I started in 2014 and I worked forward, the box on one side of me, my old bank records on the other, cross-checking each entry against a stub or a transfer or a note, Because a ledger you can't back up is just a feeling, and I wasn't dealing in feelings anymore. The apartment deposit for Travis, the truck transmission for my father, the Christmas heating bill, the bar's lease, twice, the 4,500 with the note attached, a dozen smaller ones, the kind that don't feel like anything until you stack them. And in the repaid column, all the way down, the same number over and over. The easiest number in the world to type, because it never changed. 0, 0, 0. When I added it up, my hands were steady, which surprised me. $26,400. That was what I had handed this family over the years, on top of the savings they were now circling. 26,400, never repaid, never even acknowledged. While my mother told my brother in a kitchen I grew up in that I would cover his debt too, because I never refuse family. I printed it. 2 clean copies, stapled, dated at the top. I slid them into a folder, and I understood that what I held was not a weapon, exactly. It was a mirror, the kind you can set down on a table in front of people and just let them look into, and watch them realize that the story they'd been telling about themselves was never the one written down. Brooke escalated before anyone else did, which didn't surprise me, because Brooke is the engine of a lot of this, and I'd be doing her a disservice to pretend otherwise. The text came in late, a long one, the kind people write when they've been rehearsing it in the shower. She told me I was selfish. She told me that real family helps without keeping score. She told me that she and Travis had real responsibilities, an actual marriage, plans, and that it was rich. Her word, rich, for me to be hoarding money for, and I'm quoting her, a baby that might not even happen. That last part I read 3 times. Not because it hurt, although it did, a deep old hurt she'd reached right into. I read it 3 times because I wanted to be sure I had it exactly right before I saved it. Because here is what years of bookkeeping does to you. It teaches you that the worst thing a person ever puts in writing is the thing they're most sure they're allowed to say. Brooke believed, completely, that she was the wronged party. She believed she was owed. And so she'd typed the cruelest sentence of the whole affair without a flicker of doubt, and then she'd hit send, and now it lived on my phone with a date and a timestamp, exactly the way I needed it to. I didn't reply. I'll tell you, not replying was the hardest thing I did all week. Every instinct I had wanted to defend that baby, to explain 4 years of grief to a woman who'd weaponized it. But I'd made myself a promise. I wasn't arguing, I was reconciling. So I screenshotted it, I labeled it, I added it to the folder, and I set my phone down. Love and money, I was learning, keep separate books. And I was finally, carefully, closing one of them. My father called me Sunday evening, and that almost undid me, because my father almost never calls. Roy Mercer is a quiet man who got quieter the year the plant let him go. Before that, he'd been the kind of dad who fixed things and coached Little League. After, something in him just sat down and didn't get back up, and he handed the whole running of the family over to my mother and never picked it up again. So when his number showed up on my phone, I answered fast. He was awkward. He cleared his throat a lot. "Your mother," he started, and then stopped and started again. "Your mother means well, Kenny." He hadn't called me Kenny since I was a kid. He told me a little. More than he meant to, I think. He told me Sharon couldn't sleep. He told me she'd grown up in a house that got taken away when the bank came, when she was 9, that she'd stood on a lawn and watched a man change the locks, and that she'd spent her whole life since then terrified of that one thing, of a family losing its place in the world over money. I sat with that. I'm not going to pretend it didn't move me. For a moment I could see my mother as a frightened 9-year-old on a lawn, and the shape of all her grasping suddenly had a reason behind it. That was the closest I came, that whole week, to folding. But then my father, in the same gentle voice, said the thing that set me straight. "So you'll help your brother?" he said. "You always do." Not a question. He'd called to comfort me into paying. The fear was real. The story was real. And still, at the end of it, the bill was being slid across the table to me. She never refuses family. Even my father had learned to count on it. The text from my mother came Monday morning, and it was different from the others. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something brisk and managerial. The tone she uses when she's decided the discussion phase is over. "We're going to come by Saturday," she wrote, "so we can settle all this as a family. I'll bring everyone. It's time we sat down together and got it sorted." I read it standing at my kitchen counter, and I understood exactly what was being arranged. This was not a visit. This was an ambush, scheduled and catered. She was bringing everyone, my father, my brother, Brooke, all of them, into a room because she knew the math of a crowd. She knew that the girl who'd never refused family one-on-one would find it almost impossible to refuse them all at once. 4 faces watching, the weight of everyone's expectation pressing down. She was going to surround me with my own people and make saying no feel like betrayal. A year earlier, that would have worked. A year earlier, I'd have spent the week dreading it, rehearsing apologies, working out how much I could afford to give to make the discomfort stop. But I'd spent this week differently. I'd spent it moving money and pulling records and building a folder that sat on my counter like a small, patient bomb. So I read her text, and I felt the old dread try to rise, and then I felt it settle, because I realized she was walking into my house, my living room, my table, the one place in the world where I keep the books. I wrote back 2 words. "See you Saturday." Then I picked up the folder, and I started getting ready. Not the way she expected, not with apologies, but the way I get ready for everything, with the truth, sorted, dated, and stapled. I spent the week before Saturday the way I'd spend the week before a big audit. Calm, methodical, leaving nothing to chance. I organized the folder into a sequence because order matters, because the way you walk someone through numbers determines whether they understand or just feel attacked. First, the ledger, 26,400, every line backed by a stub. Second, the promissory note, Travis's own handwriting, his own signature, his own joke come home to roost. Third, the screenshots, Sharon's calls summarized with dates, Brooke's text in full. Fourth, the bank letter explaining the joint account, so there'd be no confusion about what I had and hadn't done. I knew it cold. I could have walked through it in my sleep. Daniel watched me lay it all out on the kitchen table Wednesday night, and he asked, careful, whether I wanted him there Saturday or whether I'd rather he made himself scarce. I told him I wanted him there. Not to talk, not to defend me, just to be in the room, a steady witness, so that whatever was said Saturday, there'd be someone other than them who heard it. He nodded. "Your show," he said. "I'll just be the guy in the corner." And that was exactly right, and exactly why I married him. He never once tried to take this from me. He never said, "Let me handle your mother," or "Let me make the calls." He'd handed me one good idea on the worst night, and then he'd stepped back and let me build the whole thing myself, because he understood something my family never had. That I didn't need rescuing. I'd never needed rescuing. I just needed, for once, to be standing on my own ground when the knock came. And it was coming. I could feel it now, the way you feel weather. On Thursday, the bank called me, and that's when I knew for certain how the plan had been built. It was the joint account. There'd been activity, the rep told me, just letting me know per the alerts I'd set up. Someone had been in, had tried to move money out of the joint account. Not a huge amount had moved, the rep said, because, well, there wasn't a huge amount in there. Just over $3,000. I thanked her and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen, and I felt the whole shape of it click into place at last. My mother had gone to the bank. She'd walked into a branch, sometime that week, and reached for the one account she had a key to, the joint account from my grandmother's care, the one she'd been so gently insisting we keep open and handy. She'd reached for it because in her version of the world that account, plus a little pressure on me Saturday, was the on-ramp to the $48,000, and she'd found $3,200, almost all of it her own, and nothing else. She'd reached into the room she thought held everything, and the room was nearly empty, because I'd spent the week quietly carrying the furniture out the back. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest. There wasn't even relief. Not really. Just a strange, flat sadness that my own mother had walked into a bank to move money around me before she'd ever once sat down and asked me to my face. But underneath the sadness was the thing Daniel had given me. Move every penny. Tonight. If I'd waited, if I'd given her even another few days of access to the way things used to be, this story would have a very different ending. She'd tested the door. The door was already locked. I sat with it for a long while that night, putting the whole thing together the way I'd assemble a year's books for tax season, every transaction in its place until the story is undeniable. The plan had never really been to ask me. The plan had been to manage me. The joint account was the lever. The Saturday gathering was the pressure. The grandmother, the sweetness, the calls, my father's gentle, "You always do," Brooke's cruelty, all of it was a single coordinated effort to get me to a place, emotionally and financially, where handing over $48,000 felt less painful than the alternative of being the daughter who finally said no. And the keystone of all of it, the thing the whole structure rested on, was access. They needed to believe the money was reachable. They needed me to leave the well full and the door propped open, and my own willingness intact. Daniel had seen that on the very first night before I had. He'd looked at the situation and found the one load-bearing assumption and quietly knocked it out. Move every penny. Tonight. Not because he distrusted my family, although maybe he did, but because he understood exposure the way he understands a live wire. You don't argue with a live wire about whether it's dangerous. You cut the power first, and then you talk. By Friday, I had everything in order. The money was safe and accounted for. The joint account held only what was truly my mother's, sitting untouched. The folder was sequenced on the table, and I had a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The specific peace of a person who has finally done the math and knows, beyond argument, what is true and what is owed. Saturday could come now. I was ready for it. I almost wanted it to come. Travis called Friday night, and the velvet was long gone. He didn't bother with "How are you?" He led with panic dressed up as anger, which is the only way my brother knows how to ask for help. The collectors, he said, were calling Brooke's mother now. They were going to come after the truck. He needed it handled before Saturday. He needed to know I was on board. Because if I wasn't, if I was really going to do this, then I needed to understand what I was doing to the family. "You're going to blow us all up," he said, "over money you don't even need. Over money I don't even need." As if need were the question. As if the $4,500 he'd signed for in 2017 had ever come back. As if the column of zeros in my ledger were a clerical error and not a confession. I let him talk. I've found that people who are panicking will tell you exactly what they think of you if you just give them enough rope and silence. And he did. He told me I'd always thought I was better than them. He told me Daniel had made me cold. He told me that when Mom and Dad were gone, I'd be sorry I treated family this way. And then, almost as an afterthought, he said the thing that ended whatever was left of my hesitation. "It's not even your money to keep," he said. "It's family money. It always was." There it was, the whole philosophy of my entire life, said out loud by my baby brother at 9 o'clock on a Friday. My money was family money, my labor, my discipline, my 11 years of packed lunches. All of it was a communal account they'd simply forgotten to formally name. "Good night, Travis," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." And I hung up, and I slept better than I had in weeks. The last message before Saturday came from my mother at midnight, and for the first time she put a number on it. Maybe she thought saying it plainly would make it real, would make me feel the weight of it and cave. "Your brother needs $48,000, she wrote. "I know it's a lot, but we're family, and family doesn't let each other drown. We'll sort out the account when we're all together tomorrow. I know you'll do the right thing. You always do." I read it twice, the way I read everything important, and then I did what I'd been doing all week. I saved it. $48,000 in writing, in her own words, with the casual assumption underneath it that the sorting out of the account was a formality. A thing that would simply happen once everyone was in the room and the pressure was on. She'd told me the whole plan in a single midnight text, and she didn't even know it, because she still believed she was the one holding the cards. You always do the right thing, by which she meant, you always pay. For 34 years, those had been the same sentence. The right thing and the bill had been one and the same, fused together so early in my life that I'd never once thought to pull them apart. But I'd spent a week with my hands inside the machinery of this family, and I'd seen, finally, where the two wires actually connected. The right thing was not the bill. The right thing had never been the bill. The right thing, I was starting to understand, might even be the opposite of the bill. I set the phone face down on the folder, the way you'd weight a stack of papers so they don't blow away, and I turned off the light, and I waited for morning. I woke up Saturday clear, not nervous, which surprised me. Clear, the way the sky gets after a storm has already passed somewhere you couldn't see. I lay there for a minute and I made my final decisions, the ones that mattered more than the money. I decided I would not raise my voice, no matter what. Whatever my mother did, whatever Travis called me, I would stay level, because I knew that the moment I got loud, I'd lose. Not the argument, but myself, and I'd spent too long getting myself back to give it away in a living room. I decided I would tell the truth, all of it, with the paper in front of them, and then I would let them sit in it. And I decided one more thing, a small thing that felt important. I decided to give my mother her $3,200 back. Not transfer it, not leave it in an account she'd have to deal with the bank to access. I'd take it out in cash, put it in an envelope, and hand it to her, so that when the dust settled there could be no story, not even a whispered one, that Kendra took her mother's money. I would leave that account, and that part of my life, perfectly, undeniably clean, because the win I wanted wasn't getting one over on them. I'd spent a lifetime not being able to imagine that win, and now that I could, it turned out to be smaller and quieter than I'd expected. The win was simply this: to stand on my own floor, in front of the people who'd never once asked, and tell them the truth with my voice steady, and refuse, and mean it, and not be moved. That was the whole of it. I got up. I made coffee. I waited for the cars. Daniel was up before me, which is rare, standing at the counter in his weekend flannel making coffee like it was any other Saturday. He handed me a mug without a word, and we stood there in the gray morning light, not talking, the folder squared up on the table between the sugar and the salt. He'd put the envelope of cash next to it, the $3,200 I'd pulled from the bank the day before, counted twice, sealed. He'd even labeled it, in his blocky electrician's print. Mom's. He has a way of making the heaviest things feel ordinary, and that morning it was exactly what I needed. "You've got this," he said, which is about as close as Daniel gets to a speech. "I'll be on the couch. Won't say a word unless you want me to." I nodded. I drank my coffee. I straightened the folder even though it didn't need straightening, the way you do. And I thought, of all things, about the lemon cake. About how I'd set it down on their top step 2 weeks ago and walked away, and how nobody had ever mentioned it, which meant nobody had ever wondered why I'd come and gone without knocking. They hadn't noticed I was there. That was the whole problem of my life in one small cake. I'd always been the help that arrives and disappears, the hand that pays and withdraws, present only as a function, never as a person someone might actually look for. Then I heard it. An engine in the driveway, then a second one, doors opening, voices, my mother's voice carrying the way it always does, footsteps on my porch, and a knock on my door. I opened the door and they came in like they owned the place, which, in their minds, they sort of did. My mother first, of course, in her good coat, her face arranged into warmth, arms half open like she might hug me, like this was a happy occasion. My father behind her, eyes down, hands jammed in his pockets, already wishing he were somewhere else. Travis, jaw tight, not meeting my eye. And Brooke last, phone in her hand, chin up, looking around my living room with the same appraising glance her husband had given my kitchen 2 weeks before, pricing the furniture. "Kendra, honey," my mother said, sweeping in. "Thank you for having us. I know this has been hard, but this is what families do. We come together." She settled herself on my couch like she was hosting. Travis took the armchair. Brooke perched on its arm. My father lowered himself onto the very edge of the love seat, as far from the center of things as the geometry of my living room allowed. Daniel was already in the corner, in the chair by the window, a coffee in his hand, saying nothing, exactly as promised. And I stayed standing. I want you to picture that, because it mattered. And I didn't plan it. It just happened. They all sat down, arranging themselves into a jury, and I stayed on my feet in my own home, the folder on the table beside me. "We just need to handle this as a family," my mother said again, patting the couch cushion next to her, inviting me to sit, to come down to their level, to take my old place in the arrangement. I didn't sit. "Okay," I said. "Let's handle it." And I reached for the folder. My mother didn't wait for me to open it. She launched, because in her plan, this was the part where she talked and I listened and eventually agreed, the way the script had always run. "Your brother is in trouble," she said. "Real trouble. $48,000. And these people, these collectors, they don't care about family. They'll take his truck. They'll come after his wife's mother. He could lose everything." She let that sit. "Now, your father and I have talked it through. The simplest thing is for us to move it today. We'll go through the account, you and me, get it sorted, and Travis can pay it back when he's on his feet." "Pay it back?" I almost smiled. Brooke jumped in, right on cue. "It's what real family does," she said. "You help. You don't sit there counting." Travis said nothing. He just looked at me with that wounded, expectant face, the one that had been working on me my whole life, the little brother certain his big sister would come through, because she always came through. And then my mother delivered the line, the one I'd been waiting 2 weeks to hear her say to my face, the one I'd heard through a screen door and hadn't been able to stop hearing since. She reached over and patted my hand, and she smiled, warm and absolutely certain. "Don't make this complicated, sweetheart," she said. "You never refuse family." There it was, out loud, in my living room, to my face this time, the sentence my whole identity had been built on and quietly bankrupted by. The room waited. They were all looking at me. 4 faces, certain of the answer, certain of me. I looked back at them. And then I set the folder down on the table, and I opened it. "Before we move anything," I said, "I think everyone should see where the money actually is, and where it's been." I kept my voice level, the same voice I use when I'm walking a client through a quarter they're not going to like. I took out the first page and laid it on the table facing them. "This is the savings account you're talking about," I said. "It's mostly empty. I moved it, 2 weeks ago, into an account in my name only. The day after I came by your house with a cake and heard you tell Travis you'd have me cover his debt." My mother's smile didn't fall yet, but it stiffened, the way ice stiffens before it cracks. I laid down the second page. "This is the joint account, Mom. The one you went to the bank about on Thursday." Her head came up at that. "It's got $3,200 in it. Almost all of it yours. I left every penny of it exactly where it was, because none of it is mine to take." I set the cash envelope on top of the page. Mom's, in Daniel's blocky print. "That's it, in full. So you never have to deal with the bank again." Then I laid down the ledger. The big one. The one with the columns. "And this," I said, "is the rest of it. Every dollar I've given this family since 2014. With dates, with what it was for, and with whether it ever came back." I let my finger run down the last column. Slow, so they could all watch it. The same number repeating all the way down the page. Repaid, 0, 0, 0. I set down the last page, Travis's own handwriting, his signature loose and sure. "And that one's yours, Travis, the 4,500. You signed it as a joke. I kept it, because I keep everything." The room had gone very quiet. $26,400, I said. "That's what I've already covered." Nobody ever asked. Nobody ever paid it back. And nobody ever once said thank you. For a moment, nobody spoke. My mother stared at the ledger like it was written in a language she'd decided not to understand. Then she rallied, because she always rallies, and she reached again for the only tool that had ever worked. "Kendra," she said, her voice climbing toward that wounded register. "After everything this family has done for you, after everything I sacrificed, you're going to sit there with your little folder and your numbers and turn your back on your own brother. You never refuse family." And I looked at her, my mother, the frightened girl from the lawn grown into the woman on my couch, and I felt all of it. The love and the grief and the 34 years of it. And I said the thing I'd come to understand somewhere in that week of moving money and reading my own handwriting. "Family isn't a bill you forgot to pay," I said. Quiet, even. "It's not a credit line you draw on because someone in it is too tired to say no. I love you. I love all of you. But love is not the same thing as access." I let a breath go. So this once, just this once, after a lifetime of it being the other way around, I looked her right in the eye. "I refuse." The room exploded. My mother came up off the couch, her face gone red and shaking, all the warmth burned off in an instant. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," she shouted. "After all we did, you'd let your brother lose everything." Travis was on his feet too, swearing, telling me I'd always thought I was better than them. Brooke was filming, of course, narrating her own outrage. The noise filled my little living room, and I just stood there. I didn't shout back. I didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't reach for them. I'd said my one word, the word my mother had spent a lifetime making sure I could never say, and now that it was out, it didn't need defending. It just needed me to stand still and let them be the ones who came apart. It was my mother, in the middle of her own shouting, who finally understood. I watched it land on her face, right there in my living room, the slow horror of a person doing the math too late. She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes went to the first page, the nearly empty savings account, and then to the date I'd written at the top, 2 weeks back, the day after the cake. "You moved it," she said, the wind going out of her. "You already moved it. Before you ever came over. You knew." "I heard you," I said, through the screen door, and I went home, and my husband told me to move every penny that night. So I did. That was the moment I understood, fully, what a genius the man in the corner had been. Not loud, not grand. He'd just seen, on the worst night, the single thing that needed doing, and he'd let me be the one to do it, so that when this room came apart, I'd be standing on solid ground and not in a flood. They left not long after. There wasn't anywhere for the conversation to go once the money turned out to be gone, and the daughter turned out to be a person. My mother swept out first, coat flaring. Travis followed, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the frame. My father went last, slowest, and at the door I stopped him and pressed the envelope into his hands. "Mom's," in Daniel's print, $3,200. Every cent of it hers. "That part was always hers," I said. He looked at it, then at me, and for just a second I thought he might say something real. He didn't. He nodded once, and he went out to the car. Here is how it actually shook out, for those of you who, like me, need to know that the columns balanced. Travis did not get his $48,000. The collectors did what collectors do. He and Brooke lost the apartment a month later and moved back in with my parents, into Travis's old room, which I understand is its own kind of justice that nobody had to engineer. My mother didn't speak to me for almost 4 months. When she finally did, it was a short, stiff call about a cousin's wedding, with no apology in it, because an apology would have meant admitting there had been a wrong, and Sharon will go to her grave before she does that. I let the call be short. I didn't chase it. A few months after Saturday, she signed the paperwork to close the joint account, the one door I couldn't close alone. And just like that, the last lock came off, and the house was finally, fully mine. And Daniel and I started the third round of IVF that spring, with the money right where we'd left it. Every careful dollar, the maybe baby still possible because the well had not run dry. I keep the folder still. I don't look at it. I don't need to. It lives in a drawer the way Travis's note lived in a shoebox. Quiet, dated, true. A thing I'll never have to raise my voice to prove. I'd spent my whole life being the account everyone drew on. It turned out the most loving thing I ever did for any of us was to finally, gently, close it. If there's one thing I'd hand you across the table tonight, it's this. Love does not mean signing a blank check with your whole life on the line, and it never did. Sometimes the kindest, most loving thing you can do for the people you love, and for yourself, is to keep your own honest books, and finally let the word no balance the page. That's the week I stopped being the family bank, the cake on the step, the shoebox of I owe us, the word my mother spent 34 years making sure I'd never say. If you've been carrying a whole family on one quiet account of your own, maybe it's time to open one that's just yours. Share this with someone who needs to hear that no is allowed. Tell me your story in the comments. And subscribe, because there's always another door coming.